Those were not the words anyone expected from a 21-year-old Filipina standing on a red clay court in the middle of Spain. The scoreline said 6-3, 6-3. A clean, businesslike win over a former Grand Slam finalist, the kind of result that usually earns a polite nod and a quick exit from the interview chair. But the moment that actually traveled around the world that week had nothing to do with the score. It happened after the handshake, when Eala opened her mouth and Spain heard its own language come back at it, fluent, warm, and completely unbothered, from a country most of the international tennis world couldn't have placed on a map 12 months earlier. Rewind to April 22, 2026. The Mutua Madrid Open, first round. Eala's opponent was Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova, a Russian veteran with a Grand Slam final and a Wimbledon quarterfinal on her resume, the kind of player who has spent a decade making younger opponents look overwhelmed. Eala didn't blink. 2 clean sets, no drama, and a ticket to the on-court interview chair. That's where it turned into something bigger than tennis. Mid-interview, Eala slipped from English into Spanish and told the crowd, in her own words, that she always feels at home in Madrid, that she's spent years coming back to Spain, and that every match at this level is its own battle. She wasn't reciting a phrase she'd memoized for the cameras. She was having a conversation, and the Caja Mágica crowd responded like it knew the difference. Here's what made it land so hard. That same week, on that same court, world number 4 Iga Swiatek tried her own Spanish experiment and ran out of road almost immediately. She'd been practicing, ordering food around the city, and by her own account it went about as well as you'd expect from someone leaning on high school lessons. She got as far as asking for 2 sandwiches before the server answered back in rapid Spanish, and she had to laugh, wave the white flag, and switch to English. The WTA's own website ran a piece the very next day comparing the 2 moments side by side, effectively measuring a Filipina's Spanish against a top 4 European star's Spanish, in Spain, and letting the results speak for itself. That's the detail that turned this into a story the tour couldn't ignore. When people had said for a year that Eala was one of the most compelling personalities in the sport, it was easy to file that under enthusiasm. When the WTA itself starts writing copy that puts her fluency on a pedestal next to a former world number 1, that's not fandom anymore. That's the record. The clip escaped tennis Twitter and Threads within hours. It hit Filipino timelines on every platform, TikTok, Facebook, group chats, and the reactions weren't really about grammar. One post joked she'd be reciting Rizal's Noli Me Tangere next, the novel a Filipino national hero wrote in Spanish before the same empire executed him. Someone else, half-joking, nominated her for a beauty pageant she'd clearly never enter. Underneath the jokes was something real, pride, and a little bit of disbelief that a 21-year-old tennis player had casually done something that felt like reclaiming a piece of history nobody expected back. Spanish was the official language of the Philippines for more than 3 centuries before losing that status in 1987. Most Filipinos today have no relationship with it at all. So when Eala speaks it comfortably on a global stage, she isn't performing multilingualism as a party trick. She's holding on to something her country was largely cut off from, and doing it while representing a sport the Philippines has never been known for. Some of that fluency traces back to where she trained. Eala has spent years developing at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, immersed in a Spanish-speaking environment since she was a young teenager, under a program built around Rafael Nadal's own coaching lineage. Tony Nadal, the man who coached his nephew to 22 Grand Slam titles and has watched generations of talent pass through that academy, has spoken publicly about how well Eala has settled into life there, on and off the court. It's not a coincidence that a Filipino raised partly in Spain can stand in a Spanish stadium and sound like she belongs there. She spent nearly a decade earning that, 1 training block and 1 season away from home at a time. There's a quieter detail buried in all of this that's easy to miss if you're only watching the highlight clip. Eala has said she made a deliberate effort to hold onto Filipino alongside the Spanish and English piling up around her, listening to OPM, reading in Filipino, staying tethered to home even while an ocean away from it for months at a stretch. The Madrid moment wasn't a story about losing herself in another culture. It was a story about picking up a 3rd language without letting go of the first 2. Zoom out and the commercial math gets interesting fast. English opens doors in the US and Australia. Filipino connects her to a home country of well over 100 million people plus a global diaspora. Spanish opens Spain, opens Latin America, opens the Spanish-speaking crowds that fill stadiums from Miami to Indian Wells. That's not one athlete with one fan base. That's three audiences stacked into a single player, and Madrid was the moment people in marketing rooms had to start paying attention. 3 months later, she backed it up with the biggest win of her career. On July 4th at Wimbledon, Eala took down defending champion Iga Swiatek in an 84-minute first set that went to a tiebreak, survived 2 set points along the way, and finished her off 7-6, 6-2 to become the first Filipino in the Open era to reach the 4th round of a Grand Slam. She fell in 3 sets to Jasmine Paolini in the next round, but the ceiling on her career had visibly moved. She didn't slow down. She's currently competing at the Mutua Madrid Open, and the draw wasn't kind. First round brought former world number 4 and Olympic gold medalist Jing Qinwen, a player she'd only ever lost to before, back at the 2022 Asian Games. Eala turned that history around, grinding out a 3-set win. Then came defending champion Leylah Fernandez in round 2, on a stage where Fernandez knew every inch of the court and Eala had lost to her badly on indoor clay just months earlier. This time it went the other way. Eala fell behind 5 games to 1 in the second set, clawed her way back into a tiebreak, and closed it out in front of her family, who've been showing up courtside for her matches since she was a teenager, working her way up through junior tournaments. She's now into the round of 16, one of the names driving conversation through the entire North American hardcourt swing heading into Toronto, Cincinnati, and the US Open. None of this required her to abandon who she is to get there. She still trains the same way, still credits the same people, still answers reporters in whichever language feels right in the moment. She just keeps adding rounds and cities and languages to a career that was supposedly built for a country tennis had forgotten about. So here's the question worth sitting with. When Alex Eala eventually walks off a Grand Slam court holding the trophy and steps up to that microphone for the single biggest speech of her career, which language does she reach for first? English, the language of the tour and the rankings. Filipino, the language of the home she keeps carrying with her, no matter how far the schedule takes her. Or Spanish, the language she wasn't supposed to have, spoken back into a stadium that once ruled the country she comes from. Drop your answer below. And if you've been paying attention to this story since long before the WTA started writing articles about it, you already understand why this next stretch of tournaments matters more than any single match score ever could.